Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bear Dash. We had some technical difficulties. We apologize for that, but we are back now. I am Shailin Singh.
And I'm Jasper Sundin.
And we are finally here with a real game analysis. Cal had its season opener against UCLA, and things did not go as planned, to say the very least. Cal was destroyed 34-10. Granted, they only had 2 days to prepare, but they just did not play up to expectations. And there's many excuses for that with all the coronavirus stuff, but the team wouldn't an excuse. Coach Wilcox he didn't really even want to talk about that in the post game. He just wanted to talk about how the team played, which was not well. So Jasper, let's start off with you. What were your highs and lows from the UCLA game? Because there were a lot of lows.
Yeah. Look, to be honest here, Cal put up the sloppiest of sloppy joes. And you can cut it up any way you want regarding what happened off the field. But what happened on the field is undebatable. Cal was sloppy. Cal made errors. Cal had miscues. I think that was the biggest low for me. And that came in a lot of places. Cal's tackling was horrendous. Tons of errors, not in positioning, but just in making the tackle, just in getting there and doing the job. I mean, there were tons of times when a Cal defender would trap Brown or Dorian Thompson-Robinson in the backfield, and instead of making that tackle and creating a negative play or a short yardage play, they would miss. There'd be a spin move, an errant arm, something would go wrong, and DTR would streak down the field for 20 yards. You can't do that if you want to win football games. I mean, there were plenty of screen passes in the flat that just went everywhere because the Cal player wasn't able to lock down and make the play. It's not that they weren't getting there. It's not that they weren't in the right position. It's just that they weren't completing tackles. And that's terrible.
Well, there were definitely times where they weren't in the right positions, but for the most part, you're totally on the mark there. And what was surprising to me was that a lot of these missed tackles were from veteran players who have shown their ability to tackle in previous seasons. Coin Dang was one of the best tacklers in the Pac-12 last season, and he was missing a lot of tackles. Cam Good was missing a lot of tackles. And the worst for me, I hate to pick him out like this because he's such a good guy off the field. He's such a great leader for Cal. But Elijah Hicks, in my opinion, did not look good at all in his first real game starting at safety. He started the Red Box Bowl at safety, but this game against UCLA, he looked like he hadn't really played safety before. He was taking, weird angles to playmakers, and he was just kind of going for the hit stick instead of wrapping up. He missed a handful of tackles, and even when he would allow the ball carrier to break through his arms, there were times where he just didn't even make contact with them because his ankles just got straight up broken. So it's going to take him some time to settle into the safety position, and that was something I was really surprised to see.
Absolutely. I think offensively, there was also a ton of sloppiness. The defense, chock full of errors, tons going wrong. I mean, you look at the yardage they gave up, it was bad. But offensively, they weren't able to get going because of the same type of deal. I mean, it wasn't that people were making bad plays. People just weren't making the plays. They weren't doing the things they needed to do. Garbers had tons of missed passes. You're talking overthrown. You're talking underthrown. I mean, just little things when receivers are getting open, not able to quite hit them. Receivers were dropping balls. It just seemed like everyone wasn't quite on the same page. And again, it's just this general sloppiness, which, to be fair, you're coming off a crazy week. You've had a couple days to prepare for this game in particular. It's a new offense. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot off the field, but it doesn't change the fact that, like you said, Wilcox isn't going to make those excuses. And this team still played bad. And this offense was still very rough around the edges when it came to the pitch.
Yeah, and just every facet of the offense looked terrible. Normally it's the passing game wasn't there. The running game wasn't there. Everything looked bad, which is not a good sign. This is supposed to be the year Cal turned its offense around, because Cal has been, for those of you who don't know, sitting dead last in the Pac-12 in offense for both of the past 2 seasons. And this was finally supposed to be the year. I haven't checked the stats from, 2 weeks into the Pac-12 season, but I'm sure Cal's pretty far down there based on that one game from UCLA. The offensive line surprised me. They allowed 5 sacks, and Garbers was just getting banged around in the pocket. I mean, he's already considered somewhat of an injury-prone quarterback, and he was just getting pummeled. And it wasn't even just pass protection. In terms of running the ball, runs were consistently getting stuffed at the line of scrimmage, no matter who the running back was. Just like so out of sync. And it's really concerning. Even you mentioned some of the receivers. Cal's leading receiver had 28 yards. And when that happens, something went horribly wrong. Like the receivers weren't creating much separation, and when they did, Garbers was missing them. There were a couple touchdowns that Garbers missed that should have been easy throws with receivers going, streaking wide open. But there's a lot to be concerned about. And the biggest one was that all signs were pointing to Christopher Brown Jr. dominating this game. He went off for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns against UCLA in 2019. And the biggest reason for me predicting that last week was that UCLA allowed 264 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns in week 1. So, definitely credit to them for tightening up. Their defensive line played much, much better than it did in week 1. But Christopher Brown Jr. was just absolutely shut down. It was 8 carries for 25 yards, which is, pathetic from a performance that we were expecting to be closer to what he had in 2019.
And from a back that should frankly be expecting more. He was one of the top 6 backs in the Pac-12 last season. We both entered the season with high expectations for him. I think a lot of people did. He was looked at as perhaps a late round draft pick this year, definitely in contention next year if he could put together something that resembled last year. And this was just not the start I think anyone anticipated for him. There are problems there with the offensive line. Again, this is an O-line that had not worked against a real D-line until their game against UCLA. And that's again, because Cal's entire defensive line was quarantined due to contact tracing protocols. And that does create difficulty. They're back in practice now. They're able to work against each other, and you're able to get that experience. But it still doesn't change the fact that Brown had a terrible game. We've mentioned lows so far. I do want to touch on some highs. Cal's offense was atrocious. I think Britton Brown almost had more rushing yards than Garbers had passing yards. And that should never be happening. That should not be a statement that comes out of one's mouth after a football game. But I do give some credit to Cal's offense, specifically Bill Musgrave, not because this was a great offensive game, because like we've said, it absolutely wasn't. But Musgrave showed a real willingness to stick with Garbers and continue to give him opportunities when he was making mistakes. A lot of 3-and-outs for this offense. I wouldn't really say Garbers ever really got hot or got going or got in rhythm, but Musgrave was clearly trying to get him there. He continued to call passing plays, to look downfield, even when Garbers had struggled, even when Garbers wasn't producing. And I think that's key. You need to be patient here and understand that this was a terrible game. These were some terrible performances, but it's also anomalous in a sense. And you're implementing something. You're still getting a new offense going, and that does take some time. You'd rather that time be before the game and in the week leading up to the game, and not during the game, not during your season. But still, I like to highlight the fact that Musgrave and this Cal coaching staff really continue to sit there, really continue to let Garbers throw the ball and make mistakes, even when it was clear he wasn't maybe firing on all cylinders. And even when it was clear he wasn't having the greatest day of his life.
Yeah, and you're right. We have been pretty pessimistic this segment, and deservedly so. But I was impressed with the way some of the new starters played. Evan Tattersall made some nice stops early on in the game. He did make some mistakes later, missed some tackles as everyone else did. But Daniel Scott, new starter at free safety, replacing Ashton Davis, he impressed me. He forced an interception. He should have had it himself. He got both hands on the ball, but I'm sure he'll take giving when he can behind him. He led the team in tackles with 11, and he just overall was, quick to the football. He made some nice open field tackles, and I'm really excited to see how he progresses through the season. And then J.H. Tevis, making his start at defensive end, was second on the team with 10 tackles. So those are 3 guys who definitely they had some highs and lows themselves this past game, and we should see natural progression though. They should get better as the season goes on, as they settle into their starting positions. And there were even some freshmen getting solid reps. Muelo Aisefa played a bit behind Coin Dang and Evan Tattersall, which was nice. And how about Tommy Christakos at kickoff? I don't think either of us expected that.
Yeah, absolutely. There were a lot of newcomers who performed well. Damian Moore got to, uh, break a sweat, get out there, get a couple carries in his first college game. Makai Polk isn't a new player, but he had a couple good catches. I think he's the only player in Cal's receiving core who didn't look completely out of place, to put it lightly. And I also want to highlight Jamison Sheehan, Cal's new punter. Shailin knows I've been high on Sheehan for a minute. He didn't have like a perfect or outstanding game. There were plenty of punters who had better games than him. In fact, UCLA's punter, and Cam Akers had a better game than him. But still, he averaged nearly 40 yards a punt, which is more than Cal averaged last season. He had a 45-yard long. And it's also worth mentioning this was his first college football game, his first football game ever. And he came out and he had a decent day. He had to punt a lot. And again, it's never good when you're saying the punter had a great game. Ideally, you don't see the punter. But Sheehan came out and performed. And considering that, again, it's his first ever football game. He's a former Australian football player who made the jump to American football just last couple of years. And this has been an absolutely insane week where nothing's been taken for granted. To get out there, be calm, and put up a really solid, steady performance where you're helping your team, I think is indicative of better things to come. If this is the floor, if this is as kind of like low as it gets, it's a bright future for a Cal punter.
Yeah, and I definitely think he has a unique punting style. Just watching him punt compared to Cal in the past was really cool. I don't know if that's like an Aussie rules thing or what, but it was definitely cool to watch. And I think that brings up a bigger positive, which was special teams as a whole looked pretty good to me. I mean, Craig Woodson's block was probably the easiest punt block you'll ever see because UCLA just completely didn't have anyone assigned to him. That should have ended with a Cal touchdown. I mean, that's another discredit to the offense. When you take the ball over inside the opponent's red zone and walk away with 3 points, that's just not good. You're giving up so many free points there. And then Longhetto hit his only field goal, 31 yards. I mean, when you're 1 for 1, you can't ask for much more. But, let's look at the bigger picture now, because I think a lot of us want to just put that game in the past and leave it there. The team said they would watch the film, learn what they had to learn, and then move on. But, it was not encouraging. So that begs the question that we're all asking, should Cal fans panic yet? Because this was a team that was projected second in the Pac-12 North, and it does not look like they're on pace to do that based on that one game alone. Jasper, what do you think?
Yeah, I actually want to touch on, we have a friend in the chat, it looks like Matt dropped a couple comments about Cal backing out of football games, so we'll touch on those as well and touch on the fact that if there's anything that's on your mind, the chat is right over there. Feel free to slide in, give some questions, give some comments. We always love touching on those. Should Cal fans panic yet? This is a really unique season. And I think the bottom line for me is, in the long term, no. This isn't a season. Cal could lose every game it plays, and this doesn't really change, for me, the trajectory of the program. Yeah, it's disappointing. It's like this game. There's a lot going on off the field that doesn't change the fact that you're not playing well, but it is contextual. Like you do need to think about the bigger picture here. And as to Cal backing out of games or not being able to play games, these are all things that are coming from the Berkeley Public Health Department. These are municipal government directives that prevent Cal from playing football games. They're being cautious. Cal did just have one positive COVID test, but it's Berkeley is one of the lowest caseloads in the country, and there's a reason for that. And it's this type of caution when it comes to a global pandemic. And while that has prevented Cal from playing games, and is probably a reason they were pretty sloppy, it's just worth, again, contextualizing that type of thing. But perhaps for this season, there are definitely reasons to panic. Cal has shown some real lack of big play potential in the past. This is something we've said, I think, for the last couple of years, for as long as Wilcox has been the coach. Cal's not been a big play team. And new offensive coordinator and Bill Musgrave, he's an NFL guy. He maybe brings something new to the table. There's a new offensive scheme. I think we could have been a little hopeful that that was going to change, and it didn't change Saturday. So if that's a trend going forward, I think it's absolutely a reason to panic, at least for this season, that Cal, maybe this isn't a new Cal offense. Maybe this is just sort of the same old Bears attack, which is a bit slower and a bit ineffective when the run game is gone.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go as far as to say it's the same Cal offense, but I think what the first game did was make me look at this season as almost like a rebuilding year for the offense, because it's clear that the scheme is not where it wants to be yet. Chemistry was not there at all. The offensive line chemistry was not there at all. Garbers, for the first time in a while, looked uncomfortable in the pocket. Like, I wouldn't go as far as to say he looked nervous, but he definitely looked out of sync and uncomfortable, which is not something people were expecting this season. Like, Garbers was expected to contend for one of those top, all Pac-12 teams as a quarterback. And game one just didn't look like that. And UCLA does not have one of the better defenses in the conference. I mean, you look at their first game, they just don't. But I think this offense is going to need time to get going. And it remains to be seen how fast that process will go. It could take 2 games. It could take the rest of the season. But look, I wouldn't say panic, but I'm dwelling my expectations a little. Like, I don't hope for a Pac-12 title this year for Cal, because there are way too many issues offensively that need to be sorted out. And, there's other news defensively that should lower some expectations. Starting nose guard, Aaron Maldonado, he missed the game against UCLA, but I mean, he was the starting nose guard. He was declared out for the season. Jeremiah Hunter, a freshman receiver who is expected to be the 5th receiver off the bench, he's out for the season as well. So the hits are already coming, and just something feels off. And it felt off on both sides of the ball against UCLA. Like, even Cal's coverage, like the secondary, didn't look great. I mean, there were so many catches UCLA had over the middle to their tight ends and to receivers, just getting wide open holes in zone coverage. So there's too many problems from game one alone that prevent me from being confident, or I should say as confident in this team as I was this season.
Yeah. I think that the saving grace of a lot of this is, like we said, a lot of the reasons Cal played bad, when you break down, is just it was sloppy. It was mistakes that are really basic that Wilcox and the coaching staff are going to harp on throughout this week, because they're not big picture things. It is just the minute details, things that these guys already know how to do and just can execute on. So that's the reason.
But do you think that they're the horrible, like absolutely horrible tackling in game one, do you think that was more of an anomaly, or do you think that is something that like can be fixed in a week?
For me, again, if you're talking about the length of the season, maybe it's not the thing that you can get completely like right flipped over in a week, but it's certainly something that will improve as the season goes by, as you get more reps, as you spend more time on the field. And like you said, it's a reason to dampen expectations, but you don't hit the panic button here. You don't go, hey, you had one bad tackling game, you're done. If Cal has another really atrocious game against Oregon State in terms of tackling, then maybe you start thinking about this as a larger problem. But for me, it's like, you've barely known about this game. You, again, have a huge part of your defense out due to COVID-19. These things happen. Like, there are going to be mistakes and errors and little inaccuracies, big inaccuracies in the case of Cal's tackling. So it's maybe not quite a reason to panic. But for me, on the defensive side, one reason to actually panic is a loss of a lot of key personnel. We've talked about this. You just mentioned the loss of Maldonado, but Cal also lost Luke Beckett, a D lineman, or projected starting D lineman entering the season. Tevin Paul is not playing. Cal's tackling struggles, and its struggle really stopping the run. UCLA ran for 244 rushing yards, 244. And if you think about Cal's defense as one that's now suddenly very thin and very inexperienced, especially at the line of scrimmage, that's a little dicey, man, because that's not the kind of thing that goes away. You can't improve your depth in practice. Your depth doesn't get better in a week, especially if you're losing players like Aaron Maldonado for the season. that's just going to be difficult. And that's the reason you start being like, hey, whoa, maybe we look at this defense differently.
Yeah, and I do to you know, again, not as an excuse, but I don't think we have talked enough about the fact that this team had less than 48 hours to prep for this game, and I, as a football fan, don't know how important those extra 3, 4, 5 days are, but I would guess that it makes a huge difference. So you definitely have to, in some sense, take game one with a grain of salt because they had two days to practice. I mean, like you said, if Cal plays this bad against Oregon State, then you can hit the panic button as many times as you want. But from that one game, it should have been closer. Like, it definitely should have been closer. Cal had no reason to get blown out. They just played terribly. But you got to look forward now, and Coach Wilcox will tell you the same thing. So with that being said, how do they bounce back against Oregon State? What do they need to do to get back on track?
Yeah, look, I just mentioned the defensive line, and UCLA is absolutely golden day on the ground. The Bruins were unstoppable, mostly because Cal just couldn't stop them. I think I'd attribute that more to Cal's inability to tackle than to any particular talent on the UCLA side of the ball. Someone does have to run the ball, but it only works that well if you can't bring that guy down. And Cal could not bring that guy down. So for me, bouncing back starts there. Cal's going to need to be better tackling. They're going to need to be better defensively. And they're going to need to stop the Beavers' run, which isn't easy. Oregon has a great running game. I think Jamar Jefferson is in the backfield. He is the focal point of this Oregon State offense. He is the guy on that side of the ball for the Beavers. And Cal's going to need to figure out some way to stop him, some way to get penetration, some way to slow that down, some way to change that recipe. Because otherwise, this could be a long day, and this could be a tough day, even if they can limit Oregon State's passing ability.
Yeah, and Tristan Gebbia, their quarterback, he's played okay, nothing too flashy. Like you said, they rely on the run game. But for me, one of the biggest keys to this game is that Cal needs to trust their players to play man coverage, because there was way too often against the UCLA game that they would kind of sit back in zone and Dorian Thompson-Robinson would just pick them apart. And you have so many talented players in the secondary. Like, let Bynum, Josh Drayden, Chigi Anusium, let them show creative, because they didn't really get to do that against UCLA. Like, I'm sure all of those players are confident enough to guard any Pac-12 receiver one-on-one. And Oregon State doesn't have a standout receiver like they did last year with Isaiah Hodgins, now in the NFL. Trevon Bradford leads the team with 95 pass yards on 10 catches. So, I mean, that's not a threat that'll show up on paper as a guy you need to double team. So, as a team that lets run the ball, I would like to see the Bears maybe load up a little more on the box and let those cornerbacks show what they can do in one-on-one coverage.
Yeah, and I think we could see a lot more one-on-one coverage just because you now have a week to prepare for the game. You have a lot more tape you get to look at. You get to sit down and break this thing down, break this Oregon State team down step by step. I mean, you have to imagine going into this UCLA game, Cal learned about the game and then got on the plane. I mean, that was basically it. There's no time to look at a UCLA receiving core and figure out what these guys are going to do, what they like to do, what they want to do, which is something I think this Cal team really does well. Every time we talk to Cal defenders, they bring up tape. It's like an addiction. I think these guys live in the video room. This is a big part of how they prep. It's something they would really pride themselves on. And when you're not able to do that, I can see the impetus for going zone. You're like, we don't really know what's up. Let's sit back and try not to give up big plays, which, like you said, didn't work. I mean, UCLA was all over them. Dorian Thompson-Robinson had a field day down the field. It was ridiculous. So that, I think, is something just due to the nature of preparation for this game, we could see more from Cal, and could be key to them limiting those big plays and stopping Tristan Gebbia from having a big day.
Yeah, and we've talked about how the defensive line is going to be incredibly thin moving forward. And, if they're not getting much pressure, maybe that just means blitz more. Because if you trust your if you trust your secondary enough to go one-on-one with the receivers, that might mean you can afford to send an extra guy or two at the quarterback. So that's something I want to see Cal do. And then offensively, you just got to somehow get Garbers into a rhythm, whether that's getting the ball out faster. I mean, you could definitely see it in Musgrave's first game. He likes to get the ball out fast. I mean, Christopher Brown Jr. was involved in the passing game. There was some screens, but you need to protect Garbers as best as you can, and whether that means more screens or having an extra blocker when needed. Oregon State outside linebacker Hamilcar Rashed Jr. led the Pac-12 in sacks last season. He doesn't have one yet this season, but he's definitely someone to watch out for. I mean, their defense on the rise, and I don't know how confident I am in this offense to be able to manufacture enough points to win this game.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Oregon State has they played the last two games close. They're an 0-2 team that has not played like an 0-2 team. I think this isn't. If you're just looking at the standings, maybe as a Cal fan, you're like, hey, wait a second. Like, we haven't got our first win. This should be one where we can get it. Oregon State has not been that team in the past. They're improving wildly. They're really an up and coming squad. And this isn't. I gotta say, if I'm a Cal fan, I'm nervous here. I mean, Oregon State has been good. They've been close. They've been tight. They've played teams well. They've been physical, and you can't look at this and take this game for granted. I think there's also an opportunity here, though, for this to come down to the quarterbacks. If Cal can get something resembling a rushing game going, if their defense can come up, we talked about Garbers having a bad week, but Gebbia had a worse week, which says something because Garbers was awful. Gebbia was 11 for 24 for 85 yards and a pick, which, I mean, for you Cal fans who saw that Garbers game, he wasn't great. Gebbia was worse. So there's real opportunity here for Chase Garbers to get back in the saddle, outperform his opponent, and put this team on his shoulders like I think he can, and frankly, he should be doing as a team captain. That could be a real key to the game if Cal's able to get a passing game going and their secondary can, like Shailin said, show its talent and limit Gebbia to a small game.
So what are you saying? Win or loss? Because this might be partly me just going with this so that I'm not more disappointed than I should be, but I'm going to go Oregon State 19, Cal 17, because the offense just did nothing to encourage me.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can't. It's difficult. Cal's defense did not have a great game against UCLA, but Shailin and I have pointed to a lot of things they can do better. There are a lot of places to improve. It's difficult to look at the offense's performance and circle really like key areas to do better. It was everything. They did everything badly. I can't think of like a bright moment or something that was encouraging. Like that just wasn't. They didn't have that. So it's hard. It's hard to come in here with any confidence and be like, hey, the Bears can do better. And so it's difficult for me to predict the Cal win too. Again, for I think the same reasons Shailin laid out, this feels like a game the Bears just dropped. They lost to Oregon State in disappointing fashion last season. There's always an opportunity to turn things around, but I see this being something like 24-13 Oregon State if the Bears just cannot get their offense going. If Chase Garbers can get hot, get in rhythm, hey, it's a different ballgame. But
yeah, I mean, it's, like I said, it still remains to be seen how a full week of game prep will affect the way this team looks on Saturdays. But for now, that's all the time we have. Check us out on Dashboards TV, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. We're on all of those. Check out sportspac12.com. And other than that, have a good night. Sorry for our technical difficulties earlier. And tune into our crossover episode on Friday.